And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live. And please welcome my guest, Mark Ireland, who wrote this book, The Persistence of the Soul, Mediums, Spirit Visitations, and Afterlife Communication. Thank you very, very much, Mark, for joining us. This is a terrific read. And for anyone who is remotely interested in communication with the afterlife, is it possible? And for all those skeptics out there, just listen. Maybe it's possible, maybe it's not. You'll hear something in our interview that might spark your interest. Mediums. Do you feel like you could be a psychic medium? We're going to talk about that too. But first, I want to talk a little bit about this book. This is your third published book. What's behind it, and why did you decide to write it, Mark?
Well, first off, thanks for having me, Deborah. It's great to be
Sure.
here. This was actually a subsequent book to my first effort, Soul Shift. And it was all really driven by the fact that although I grew up with a father who was a pretty prominent psychic and medium back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, counseled people like Mae West, who I got to meet when I was 19, and other celebrities like Glenn Ford, David Jansen, Amanda Blake, and had his own church. It was in a non-denominational church. I grew up with that, not only the evidence of psychic phenomena being real, but also I saw evidence of the spirit communication where he'd deliver highly specific messages to people he didn't know with great detail that was very touching to those individuals. Having seen that as a child, I grew up with that, and it was just part of our life, part of my life. So I never really questioned it that much, and it gave
Right.
me confidence much later as I was an adult, although I didn't really follow my father's path and I had gone down a conventional path, getting a degree, getting married young, having a couple of kids, and being in the business world. My youngest son unexpectedly passed at the age of 18. And that really was the catalyst for me, drawing me into this, back into my dad's field and doing a deeper dive. So the first book, Soul Shift, was really my memoir, my journey after that, and my re-entry into my dad's world, seeking not only confirmation, but just connection with my son and a greater understanding of why we're here and where I think we're going, and evidence and what is this field of psychic phenomena all about. The next book, Persistence of the Soul, which actually with my dad's book was sandwiched in between, which we could talk about later. Persistence of the Soul was a deeper dive. So I continued to share personal experiences that I had that were pretty profound. But also within that book, I shared scientific evidence, research, and did a deeper dive. So I not only shared the experiences, but I shared supportive research behind those. So that's really the purpose of the most recent book.
Mm. Talk to us about the skeptics, people who are like, what do you mean psychic phenomenon? What do you mean trying to reach the other side? Where are they? I can't see them. What do you say to those people? I really want to reach those people
Sure.
because it's difficult, right? A lot of people need to see what's out there. In fact, I was talking to someone in my own family last night, and he said, I just don't have that. I don't get it. And the conversation just stopped there. What do you say to those people? Perhaps they can't be reached, or because I honestly believe if we can sort of find a way to, understand that perhaps there is another side, that maybe we'd have a more compassionate side here on Earth. You know what I mean? If we realize that it's not just us here, it continues to evolve. That's what I believe. But would you speak to those skeptics?
Sure, and I agree with you. I think part of it is, we've been indoctrinated into the dogma of materialism or physicalism, as it's called, which seems to be the standard in academia. It's not
Right.
really been proven or supported. It's just accepted, just like somebody accepts a religious concept. And it's actually almost become like a religion, an anti-religion, if you will, that believes that matter is primary and that everything comes from matter and that consciousness is generated by the brain. But there's really no proof of that. They cannot prove that. And there's a lot of evidence that that's not the case at all, that consciousness is actually primary. It's something other than that that we don't understand. The brain is a filter or a sifter of consciousness that allows us to live and function in this world, in a world where there's been scarcity and the need for survival comes into play. So I'd say, there's two types of skeptics. There's open-minded skeptics, and those to me are the real skeptics, because I have a skeptical side too. That's part of the reason I dug into all this at a deeper level, because I want to know what the truth is, and I want to know how things work as best I can understand them. But there are debunker type skeptics, and they're closed off, they're dogmatic, they're typically secular humanists who are atheists, and they don't want not just any religion introduced, but anything of a spiritual nature introduced. So those folks are approaching it just like a fundamentalist in a religious doctrine would be. They're not open to the evidence. All they're going to do is spend all their time and energy trying to refute any evidence or even looking at the evidence. So I guess what I would say to skeptics, open-minded ones, is look at the research, look at the evidence. It's there. My book actually contains a lot of it in more of a Reader's Digest fashion for someone who wants like a quick overview of all those bodies of evidence that exist. In general terms, I'd say there's a puzzle of different pieces that fit together that provide that evidence. One is near-death experience phenomena. The phrase that was introduced by Raymond Moody when his blockbuster book came out in 1975, Life After Life. More recently, like Dr. Eben Alexander, a neuroscientist who had a near-death experience, he wrote a book called Proof of Heaven, which is sold millions of copies. I wish mine sold millions. But so near-death experience phenomena is one area. Mediumship is another. And there's people that have researched mediumship going back, way back, even beyond 1882 when the Society of Psychical Research first started in London. There's a lot of phenomenal evidence going back to those dates, those early tests and things that were done by some of the most prominent scientists of the day that are highly evidential. And today, you've got people like Dr. Julie Beischel, who runs the Windbridge Research Center in Tucson. She's done phenomenal work. She's got a PhD in pharmacology. So her standards are super high. She's doing quadruple and quintuple blinded studies. So the evidence is there for people who want to look at it and consider it. There's also ADCs, what are called after-death communications. That's where someone has a direct experience, whether that be a vision or some sort of visitation. My wife has had that happen. And terminal lucidity, where someone's on their deathbed and they're about to pass, and suddenly they experience the presence of others who have passed before them. And in some cases, they detect the presence of people not known to be dead. So they'll say, oh, so-and-so's here, so-and-so's here, and so-and-so's here. And then the person, maybe their relative is there with them, is like, well, so-and-so's still alive. And then they find out afterward that, no, that person actually died 3 days ago. So there's a large body of evidence, but it just comes down to, are you willing to look at that and consider it? And what I found is most people are just going to go along their lives in a normal fashion until they have an event like I did that shakes them up and makes them want to dig deeper. And then it takes a personal experience really to change someone's beliefs. It's not going to happen. I mean, reading books helps. It could get you on that path, but really having a personal experience is the game changer.
Let me backtrack a little bit from some of what you said. Near-death experience, and one of those experiences where, you're just about to die, but you sort of make it. A lot of people will say, oh, it's just the synapses, near death, not near death, when you're on your deathbed, the synapses are misfiring. So all the people are coming back in your life. What do you say about that? And I know someone who had a very, very specific near-death experience and was in a tremendous car accident with a bus, head-on collision with a bus that went out of control. And she was trapped under the bus, and she saw her brother, who had passed, lift up the bus. And people were like, oh, come on, that's just a dream. That's just things are misfiring as she's on her way out. What do you say to those skeptics?
Well, a couple things. So if you go back to the people who are on their deathbed, I think the best evidence there is, well, if there was one person that they saw who was assumed to be alive by the other relative who's there with them, but it actually died a few days before, unbeknownst to anyone, including the person who's dying, to me, that says something. And in terms of near-death experience phenomena, there are many cases where the brain's completely shut down. I've actually interviewed Dr. Pim van Lommel. He's one of the top researchers of near-death experiences. He's based in the Netherlands. And there are cases, and I'll give you an example. Anita Morjani is one who had a near-death experience. She was on her deathbed with cancer. She left her body and she went down a hall, way down a hall from where her comatose body was lying, and overheard a conversation between her doctor and her husband about her condition and how soon the doctor thought she would die and all these kinds of things. And then she actually pulled through this and then later recounted that conversation to both of them, and it was completely accurate.
And they
So,
weren't in the same room with her. They were in another room.
correct, different room.
Yeah.
So to
Wow,
me,
that's
that's
pretty
pretty strong.
incredible.
You have the Pam
Yeah.
Reynolds case where she had an aneurysm that had to be removed, but it was a very delicate procedure. So they actually chilled her body down to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, removed all the blood from her body and brain, performed some procedures on her, did the repaired the aneurysm, and then refilled her with blood, brought her back, gradually raised her temperature. And she reported all these vivid things that happened to her, including what surgical instruments were used, what they looked like, how they were used. So while she was floating above her body, seeing all this at a time when her brain's completely offline, she's got no activity in her brain or brain stem, no blood in her body or her brain. And then also reports meeting a deceased uncle and other relatives, and kind of goes on to the next realm and then is sucked back into her body once her, they restore her blood and her temperature and restart her heart. So are some good examples of cases. I've got more in my book, but there are more out there people could read read those accounts and other things. Some are in science journals, some are in books by other authors who specialize in those areas. Dr. Jeffrey Long is another one who has recounted thousands of cases of near-death experiences and kind of put together a meta-analysis of the data and come up with a lot of interesting things. The commonalities of experiences that people had and how they're so consistent across the board in many ways.
Two questions. Number one, where are we going? Really, where are we going after this, to the best of your knowledge? And number two, what if you had kind of a crappy life here and you did some pretty awful things? Then what? Do you have to come back and do it again? I mean, these are your thoughts through your research. Or what about somebody who ended somebody else's life and really did the ultimate awful thing? What happens to them? What kind of energy what are they facing on the other side? So first, where are we going? And what about those folks who haven't exactly lived an exemplary life here?
So now we get into the area of speculation, which is fun. And
okay.
it's fun to go here, actually, to talk about what we think and why we think that. But to me, I think, at our core, we're a soul or a spirit in a body for a period of time for experience. Why do we want these experiences? Because they refine us and have us understand how other people feel and maybe develop empathy, compassion, other characteristics like that. Where we go, I think it's a multi-dimensional universe. And so I think it's kind of like a specific gravity thing. More evolved souls are going to go to a level that's maybe higher, or we perceive it as higher or better or more refined, with like souls who are at that level. And those who are maybe the murderers or the rapists or people who don't have compassion, or they're going to gravitate towards like-minded people. And not to say they're stuck there forever, because they can evolve too. Maybe it's through reincarnation. Maybe it's through being touched by someone from a higher level who can reach down to them. Maybe they feel some sort of repentance and want to get out of that area, or that it's almost like a realm of consciousness more than I think of it as a place per se. But that's kind of how I see it. It's a gradation of consciousness. Higher level consciousness goes up, a lower goes down, and this world is one of the places where a soul can be refined to, and maybe there is such a thing as like a karma, or a law of sowing and reaping, where I'm not saying it's exact. So I killed you in my last life, so you're going to kill me this one. Not necessarily that, but just so you have greater empathy and understanding. And one of the things that's shown in the near-death experiences that's a very common feature is the life review. So people will,
Mm.
they end up having to judge themselves. There's no third party God arbitrator who's judging you and saying you're going to heaven or hell. Rather, you stand in the shoes of the person you affected and see it through their eyes and feel what they felt. So, what
Oh.
more could impact you than that kind of experience? That's a common feature of near death experiences. So, you would understand not only what it felt like to be shot by the person that you shot, but maybe then the
Mm.
impact on all those family members who missed that person and were affected by that. So I look at that evidence as a key component to my thinking about, okay, it's really about love. I know it sounds generic, it sounds cliche, but if it's about love and you've caused harm to someone else, maybe if you sense what that feels like and understand how you affected those people, you become more compassionate, empathetic, and understanding about the damage you did, and maybe you want to act differently going forward.
You know, at the moment of conception, scientists have captured an explosion of light and energy, right? So, how are we here and how are we once we pass all related to the energy that's out there in the universe? It's wide, it's vast, it seems to be endless because we can't see the end of it, right? How is it all related? Do we
Yeah,
go out
and
there and come back for the day? You know what I mean? Like, I often wonder about that. I think of my family members who have passed, and I'm like, hey, where'd you guys go today? Where are you? Out there somewhere? Are you going to come back? Like, again, we don't know this, but through your studies and universal studies, what are your thoughts? Like how we're all related?
so I think there is one primordial consciousness that preceded everything. You could call that God, you could call it the universe, whatever. But that is the primordial consciousness that from that all evolved from that. We are
Mm.
differentiated pieces of that consciousness, all interconnected in some way. And all the physicality has come from that to create, I guess, realms for us to experience that as a feedback loop to that that primal consciousness. Um, so that's kind of how I see it. I think if you really look at the universe too, we only, according to science, we only see this small percentage. The physical universe is but a small percentage of everything that exists. And even what we can observe through our eyes and our instruments is this narrow bandwidth. And when you get into the realm of quantum mechanics, quantum physics, which measures the very small, we get to a realm where we don't know what's below that. We get down to
Right.
the atomic, the subatomic particles, which we don't even know what's a particle, what's a wave, or what's below that. And it sometimes comes in and out of this physical universe. So to me, there's something beneath or beyond that. It's maybe a platform, a basic a realm from which all this stuff projects up into our world. So that baby that comes into a new body, it's a conscious entity that existed before this life in most cases,
Mm.
unless it's a new creation, if you will. Um, but it comes in at some point in a manner that I guess you could deem miraculous, to experience what this world has to offer. The suffering, which can refine us, the joy, which can make life worth living here, and everything in between.
Now, the trauma that you had 20 years ago, losing your youngest son, and I believe it was from an asthma attack, is that correct?
Right.
How do you live through that? And how, are you communicating him? Do you feel him? How, explain that to us, because I really am hopeful that this will help other parents who are grieving. And I know that you have a nonprofit. You could also address that you speak with other parents who've gone through tremendous grief. Can you talk about all that?
Sure. Well, first off, the organization is called Helping Parents Heal. It
Mm.
started out as just a woman in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I getting together and partnering. She had
Mm.
already had a single group for bereaved parents because her son had, interestingly, also died on a mountain like my son. My son died in the McDowell Mountains in Scottsdale, Arizona, hiking behind our home. Her son
Mm.
was in the Himalayas at the time on a field trip with the University of Arizona, and the bus took them up too rapidly, and he developed altitude sickness and died. But
Oh.
she met me through what I would call synchronistic events, which were pretty crazy. But we got together and she invited me to be her first speaker ever at her inaugural meeting. So I spoke there. And then after that, about a year and a half later, I said, because I was nudged by a medium friend of mine, I said, hey, Elizabeth, would you like to maybe take what you have here and blow it out into something bigger? You've got one group, but what if we blueprint your meetings and then we try and have other affiliate locations come on board and and then we could expand this thing, and I can help you put together a newsletter and a website, neither of which she had, and maybe change the name to something else because her original name was Parents United in Loss. She felt it was kind of a negative name. So I said, how about Helping Parents Heal? She loved that. We did it. And now today, more than a decade later, we have 26,000 members. We have 165 affiliate chapters worldwide, and we have a conference every other year. This one's going to be in August of 24. It'll draw 1,000 people from across the world. So, well, what's that all about? Well, let me go back to my son and my experiences. So in the early days, like probably a day or two after my son passed, I wanted a form of connection with him, and I wanted it in a direct way. So the first thing I did was I went into a darkened closet. It was a walk-in closet, closed my eyes, tried to meditate, and asked for a connection of some sort. And I'm not a great meditator. I'm not going to lie about that. I mean, the fact is, sometimes I could still my mind, sometimes I can't. In this case, I was able to still my mind completely. And within a short period of time, my son's face scrolled across my mind's eye, and I felt joy, and he was actually glowing. And then right after that was enough. But then right after that, I saw a symbol, and it was a cross with an oval loop at the top. Now, at the time, I'd seen those, but I didn't know what they represented. So when I was done, I had to go Google it. So this is the analytical side of me. I'm checking out, well, what does this mean? It's an Ankh. It's the oldest cross of human history, dating back about 5,000 years to the ancient Egyptians, the lower portion meaning physical life, and the oval loop representing eternal life. So I got a puzzle to put together. I felt that my son was telling me, I'm fine, Dad, I'm in eternal life. Now, had I known what the symbol meant, I could have said, okay, my subconscious mind is trying to make me feel good, but I didn't know what it meant. So I had to go research it. The next thing that was really substantial was, by this time, my dad had already been gone 12 years. When my son passed, we didn't know the cause of death. No authorities would tell us anything. His best buddy who would try to resuscitate him simply said that Brandon had said that his heart was kind of beating rapidly, and he said that his arms were kind of numb before he passed out. So 3 days later, I'm in the mortuary. I connect with my uncle by cell. Now, my uncle had similar abilities to my father. And he said, Mark, I wanted to tell you something. Last night, I tried to connect. I couldn't get anything. But this morning, I was doing my morning meditation, and your dad came to me. And he wanted you to know he was there when Brandon passed. Brandon was a little confused, but your dad helped him adjust and understand what was happening. He said, Brandon wanted you to know that you're the best parents he ever could have had, which is the nice fuzzy thing we like to hear. But then I got the evidence. He said, your dad said Brandon's death was caused by a lack of oxygen in his bloodstream that caused his heart to fail. 2 days later, the autopsy physician calls me and says, your son's death was caused by a severe asthma attack that drove his blood oxygen levels down, causing cardiac arrest. So I got the cause of death 2 days before that, before the autopsy results were revealed from my uncle through psychic means or mediumship. So that was really the first thing that kind of put me back on this path to kind of get back into my dad's world, to look at this. Sharing that with family and friends gave great healing to a lot of them. And then things kind of unfolded from there. At the 3-week mark, I was watching the NBC affiliate news in Phoenix, and they were showing an excerpt about a mediumship study being done at the University of Arizona at the time, where they took a medium under blinded conditions and they put a sitter there. The sitter is the person who's, wanting to connect with a deceased loved one. And that medium has to provide a reading without any visual contact with the sitter, and not able to communicate directly with the sitter. In this case, the medium was Alison Dubois, who later became famous from the show Medium, and originally on NBC and then later picked up by CBS. But she was unknown at the time, or relatively unknown. And she was giving highly specific information. I was really impressed. And then they debriefed with the sitters afterwards, and pretty much everything was right on the money. And I thought to myself, God, I'd love to have a reading with her. I'd love to go in that lab someday. I didn't know it at the time, but those both things would happen. And in fact, the very next day, I got a call from a man named Jerry Conser, who knew my father. And he says, hey, Mark, I know what you've been through. I know someone who might be able to help you. Her name is Allison Dubois, and here's a phone number you can call to get a reading.
Wow.
So I thought, okay, that's pretty synchronistic here. My dad's maybe pulling strings for me. And then within a year, I was actually in that lab as a test sitter for a Discovery Channel episode. So these things just started unfolding. And the interesting thing about the reading with Allison pertaining to my dad's book. So you mentioned I published 3 books, 2 of which I wrote, and the third one I didn't. It was my dad's book. So fast forward 6 months, I'm sorry, 8 months to August that year. I finally get in to see Allison. 2 weeks before that, a gentleman handed me a box. Inside the box was a typed manuscript, all 8.5 by 11 typed pages that said, Your Psychic Potential, a Guide to Psychic Development by Richard
Mm.
Ireland, dated 1973. I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
where'd you get this? He goes, well, your dad gave it to me for safekeeping because you were out of state at the time. I said, but that's been 12
Wow.
years. Why are you giving this to me 12 years later? He goes, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to. 2 weeks later, I go see Allison, and she gives me a number of highly specific validations, both of my son, my dad, and others. But one of the first things she said was, "You got your father here, and he showed me a book, but I think it's his book, and it's for you to take forward. Does that make sense to you?" I'm like, yeah, I think I
Wow.
understand. So really, that's the background on the experiences I've had with my son, and they have continued. I've had a number of them in a variety of ways. Um,
Mm.
I don't want to ramble on, but I think the most stunning of which actually involved my wife, and it was at the 6 month mark. We had gone on a cruise to celebrate Brandon's graduation from high school, but since he wasn't physically able to go with us, we took our older son, Stephen, and Brandon's buddy, Stu, who had been on the mountain with him trying to resuscitate him. We were gone for a week. Before we left, a gentleman named James Linton, who we'd become friends with, because he had actually been on the mountain the day Brandon died. He tried to help, but he got there too late. He had connected with us later through an online obituary, and we became friends with him. So here we are 6 months later. We're about to go on this cruise, and James is a musician. He plays guitar, he sings, he composes songs, he has an in-home studio. He said, "Hey, could I borrow Brandon's bass guitar while you're gone?" And that's it there in the middle. That blue bass was Brandon's bass guitar.
Oh, wow. Oh,
So
beautiful.
so we loaned it to him. So we're gone for a week. We come back. We get back from the cruise. My wife Susie's sitting at the foot of our bed, and all of a sudden she feels Brandon's presence with her. Not only
Mm.
feels him, but sees him as a shadow figure out of her peripheral vision. The very next day, we get a call from James Linton. James is like, Susie, I've got something to tell you, but I don't know how to share it. She says, well, go ahead, James. She figured he dropped the bass. But he says, I was recording this song in the studio, and I suddenly felt the presence of another person in there. Then I saw a shadow figure out of my peripheral vision. Then I saw flashes of white light. I thought I was hallucinating, so I went and drank some water. I got some lunch. I took a shower. But every time I came back, it got stronger and stronger. And finally, I just said, okay, Brandon, what do you want? He said at that point, he
Oh,
felt guided to redo the lyrics and bass line of this song, which was called The Other Side. And he said, this is the best song I've ever written, but I didn't write it. So, whether a person buys the story of the song, I do, but whether you buy that or not, how about the back-to-back instances that are identical with the shadow figure and the presence being felt without him knowing anything of my wife having them?
I just believe you need to be open to it. And I love to speak to skeptics because I understand why they're skeptical, but just be open to it. And if something happens, no need to just write it off as just nothing. Maybe it's something to look into. And, we don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to talk to you briefly about mediums. What is a medium? And if someone believes that they have that gift, how can they continue to really explore that? Because I think that you help people with that too, right?
Well, I've done more of a medium certification, which is more
Yeah.
of a service to sitters, potential sitters. So I screen mediums and make them go through 5 blinded readings and generate statistically significant results. And then if they do that, I'll certify them and put them on a website. I don't make a
Oh,
dime from it. It's done as a public service because after my first book came out, I got flooded with requests for who's a good medium? Who should I see? And at that time, I knew a handful, but they were mainly celebrity type mediums who had long wait lists and charged a lot. So I thought there must be other people who can do this that are lesser known. And here I am almost 10 years later, and I've certified 41 people. That's what I primarily do, but I can direct people who think they have it to other resources. Um, So psychic phenomena is basically, I would call it, it's been called the sixth sense. And there's a lot of different aspects to it. I think it's been said that all psychics are mediums. I'm sorry, all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. So psychic phenomena can include things like psychometry, where someone touches a watch or an object that someone owns and can tell you things about them by reading energy. Likewise, there's telepathy, where you could, read the mind or the thoughts of another person through telepathy. There was a lot of studies done at the Duke Parapsychology Lab from 1932 to 1972 about that. Most of those were telepathy experiments that were highly successful. There's also clairvoyance, which is the idea of clear seeing or clear vision, clairaudience, clear hearing. So some people can have the psychic abilities, and it's a more refined, higher level ability to actually have what is generally regarded as telepathy with a deceased or discarnate individual. So the medium is someone who's got this finely tuned ability, and often it's somebody who's born with this. It can be refined over time through practice and so forth, but it's usually somebody born with it, like my dad. He's just born with it. It was a natural thing for him. And they're able to feel a connection to and the presence of a deceased person when talking with a sitter or the bereaved person, and then sharing communication that's given to them through those means, the visual, the auditory, through all those. And it's very comforting. And that's really, to me, the reason that I'm interested in it is because I deal with grieving people. I was a grieving person, and it gives a level of comfort and hope. So traditional therapy, just going to a therapist, psychologist is great. Having support from friends and family is good too. But you could have all those things. And the reason our organization exists is because none of the other organizations for bereaved parents allow the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence. We allow that. It's very healing. That's the hope element. And that's why I've been interested in it.
What about those of us here? And this has to be my final question because we are going to run out of time. This happens to me a lot. I think I spoke to you on the phone and told you about it. And I mean, a lot, all the time. I may not have been speaking to a friend of mine who happens to live over in Italy in a few years, and then all of a sudden, I mean, literally, I was speaking to my husband about her, and I said, do you remember this person? We had such a wonderful time. We should reach out. And the phone rings, and she calls me. Or I'm thinking about something that is concerning me greatly about someone. And then unfortunately, I find out that maybe they were involved in a situation that wasn't so great. I was walking down the street thinking, also with my husband, who also claims that he never feels anything like this. So he doesn't even get it when I tell him about this at all. But I'll be speaking about somebody and say, we should call them, and honest to God, I looked over and they were in the store. This happens to me a lot. Is it just coincidence? What's going on? Because it sometimes scares me a little bit. I'm thinking, what's that about?
It is a form of psychic phenomenon. It sounds to me like you are telepathic and you do have some measure of clairvoyance or clairaudience. And clairaudience doesn't necessarily mean you're hearing an auditory sound. It's just like it could be a thought dropped into your awareness, or like an idea or a thought.
But does that mean I'm picking up energy, or like what is it I'm picking up? Why does the phone ring from Italy with a person I hadn't spoke to in years? Like that's bizarre to me. What is
it goes back to, for me, I have to just speculate, but to me, it goes back to the idea that there's an interconnectedness of everything at a deeper level. And within quantum physics, there's a feature called entanglement. And entanglement says that any two particles that have ever put together in a special way could be separated as far apart as opposite ends of the universe, and whatever happens to one is instantaneously reflected in the other. It seems to violate Einstein's law of special relativity, but yet it's been validated as correct and true.
Yeah.
So to me, that means that at a deeper level, below this physical level of 4 dimensions, the fourth being time, which is really a byproduct of how big the universe is and how long it takes to get from one end to the other, tells you there's a deeper level connection that we don't really understand, that's mystical. And I'm okay with the mystical aspect of it. I don't think it's a mechanical thing. It's not like a radio wave.
No, okay.
Because psychics have been tested in Faraday cages that block all that stuff out, and they've still performed, my dad included, from what I understand. back when UCLA used to have a lab, a parapsychology lab.
Mm.
So that's my feeling about it. And Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, I think I mentioned to you offline, in England, did a study on what he called telephone telepathy, which is exactly what you're talking about. And he found that there's something to it. It's way beyond chance that people know who's calling before they pick up the receiver quite often. So you're not alone in that regard.
Yeah, and finally, I know I keep saying finally, but this is finally your dad, right? He worked with some pretty incredible people. They came to him for what? And what did he do? And let's make this one pretty brief if you can.
Well, I think they were looking for direction. They were looking more typically for psychic direction. Like for Mae West, she wanted to know, should I make Myra Breckenridge? Stuff like that. For others, it was just personal things in their lives, like maybe what was going well or what path they should take. I think we all have an inner guidance or intuition that we should follow first and foremost, but
Yeah.
sometimes you need a little help. And I guess those folks felt like they needed help. They'd seen my dad's work, they were blown away. And so they wanted to meet with him individually to see, if he could provide some direction that would be helpful to them as well.
Mm. Mark Ireland, I really, really enjoyed our conversation. Please pick up his book, The Persistence of the Soul. It's a terrific read. It's a smart read. And also, how can people reach you if they have questions? How can they find you?
Just go to my website because everything I've talked about today, between helping parents heal, my medium certification program, videos of my father, and other media things, are all on my site. That's markirelandauthor.com. Mark with a
Hmm.
K, Ireland like the country, the word author, markirelandauthor.com. And I have a contact
Beautiful.
page right on there.
Any final words that you'd like to tell our audience, please?
Just that, we live in this materialistic world where there's a materialistic mindset. And I would just challenge that and say, hey, I think we're all here for a purpose. We all have a path. So if you can embrace that and enjoy your life, have joy, and just go through it, the trials and ups and downs, see it through. There's a reason for you being here and for going through all these experiences. You'll be better for it on the back end.
Mm. Thank you so much for that. Those are great parting words. I appreciate it. And you're right. For those of us, many of us who are stressing and wondering why we're here, I guess the answer, if there is one, release and know that we're here for a reason, and try and look into that. Try and find that. Right.
Yeah, I think it can be revealed to you, and you'll know you're on the right path if things are going right and they're falling into place. Um,
Mm.
and I think if you can develop a little bit of intuitive insight, trust your gut a little bit more, and don't just think of everything as being like out there. And I've had to use my analytical mind for everything. It's okay to trust that aspect of yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark. And again, everybody, our show and our interview with Mark Ireland can be found on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. And then after that, of course, as an audio podcast on iHeartRadio, on Apple Podcasts, honestly, anywhere that you get your podcast, just put in Deborah Kobylt Live with Mark Ireland and you'll find our interview. So again, please pick up the book, The Persistence of the Soul, really an interesting read. Thank you again for joining us, and thanks to all of our listeners and viewers as well. See you next time. Bye bye.
So long.